The cold of the marble floor was a living thing, a predator that crept up
Here you
through
go,
the warm
kids. Get
soles of
something
his
nice for
sneakers
yourselves.
and into the very marrow of his bones. It was a cold that spoke of wealth, of a world so far removed
Here
from
you
his
go,
own
kids.
that
Get
it might
something
as
nice for
well have been
yourselves.
on another planet. Here, on Fifth Avenue, even the air seemed polished, tasting of expensive perfume and the faint, metallic hum of money. But for 10-year-old Jamal Washington, the only reality was the desperate, gnawing hunger of his baby sister and the 2 thin dimes clutched in his sweaty palm. 20 cents. A fortune painstakingly assembled from found pennies and a lucky nickel. Discovered by a storm drain, it felt as heavy as a king's ransom and as worthless as dust. Get out of here now before I call security. The manager's voice was a shard of glass, sharp and jagged, slicing through the store's hushed reverence. It wasn't loud, but it was pitched to carry, to command the attention of every customer browsing the ridiculously overpriced artisanal cheeses and imported mineral waters. Heads turned, eyes shielded by sunglasses that cost more than his family's. Monthly rent swiveled in his direction. He saw the flicker of annoyance, the faint curl of a lip, the subtle shift in posture that broadcast a universal message. You don't belong here. Jamal stood his ground, a small defiant island in an ocean of affluence. He kept his gaze fixed on the woman behind the counter, a middle-aged specter with hair the color of bleached bone and a mouth set in a permanent sneer of disapproval. Her name tag read Brenda. He made a point to remember it. Please, ma'am, he began, his voice a tremor that he fought to control. He would not let it break, not here, not in front of them. It wasn't fear that made him tremble, but a desperate, white-hot determination that burned in his chest. My little sister is hungry. She's only 6 months old, and she won't stop crying. I just need some powdered milk, just a small can. He opened his hand, revealing the 2 silver coins on his dark skin. They seemed to shrink under the store's fluorescent glare, pathetic and insignificant. Brenda glanced at them, then back at the boy in torn jeans and a faded t-shirt, her disgust a palpable force. Her eyes catalogued his bare ankles, the scuff on his cheek, the untamed halo of his hair. She saw not a child in need, but an infestation. 20 cents won't even buy you a stick of gum here. Kid, she sneered, her voice dripping with the casual cruelty of the comfortable. This is a store for real people, not for beggars. Now, I'm not going to tell you again. The automatic door chimed, a melodic, welcoming sound that was so at odds with the tension gripping the space around the counter. A man entered, and the store's atmosphere seemed to shift, to reflect. He was a titan carved from granite and ambition, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost $3,000. His shoes, Italian leather polished to a mirror shine, made no sound on the marble floor. His presence filled the room, sucking the air from lesser lungs. Jamal had seen his face on the covers of magazines in the library. Theodore Blackstone, the king of New York real estate, a man who built skyscrapers as monuments to himself. He had just come from a meeting where he had closed a $50 million deal, a transaction so monumental it would reshape a corner of the city's skyline. The celebratory champagne was still a pleasant warmth in his belly. He had stopped in for a bottle of Bling H2O, water flown in from an English spring and bottled with Swarovski crystals, a ridiculous indulgence that amused him. It was a small ritual, a way to remind himself that he could afford to consume the absurd dart. As Blackstone moved towards the refrigerated section, Jamal saw not a billionaire but a sliver of hope, a desperate, long shot, last chance hope. He turned, his heart hammering against his ribs, and stepped into the Titan's path. The large, dark eyes, windows to a soul far older than its 10 years, looked up at the magnate. Sir, please. Jamal's voice was quiet but clear, cutting through the ambient noise. I swear I'll pay you back when I grow up. Every time my grandmother told me about the hard times, she said, there's always someone with a good heart. Can you be that person today? Theodore Blackstone stopped. He was a man who moved through the world on a track of his own design, and unscheduled stops were an irritant. He looked down, his icy blue eyes taking in the small, dirty child who had the audacity to address him. The interruption was an annoyance, a piece of street grit that had somehow found its way onto his polished path. Boy, Blackstone's voice was a low rumble of impatience. Do you have any idea who I am? I build skyscrapers. I don't give charity to bums. The word bum stung, but Jamal refused to flinch. He straightened his small frame, his chin lifting in a gesture of unconscious defiance. I'm not a bum, sir, he replied, his voice gaining a measure of strength. Tears pricked the back of his eyes, hot and shameful, but he willed them away. My father died in Afghanistan serving this country. My mother works 3 jobs. but today she collapsed from exhaustion. I just want my little sister to stop crying. A cruel, humorless laugh escaped Blackstone's lips. It was a dry, grating sound. What a touching story. Let me guess, the next act involves a desperate plea for money for an emergency operation. He flicked his gaze towards Brenda, the manager, a silent command passing between them. Call security. These people are all the same. They spin these dramatic little tales, thinking it entitles them to a piece of what the rest of us have worked for. Then something extraordinary happened. The boy did not shrink. He did not lower his head or scurry away in defeat. Instead, Jamal Washington held Theodore Blackstone's gaze, his dark eyes burning with an intensity that was unnerving. A profound and startling serenity settled over him, a calm that seemed to emanate from a place of ancient strength. You will remember this day for the rest of your life, Jamal said, his voice even and devoid of any childish quaver. And, when you do, you will understand that you wasted a chance to meet the person who could have changed everything for you. Blackstone's brow furrowed. The boy's words were so absurd, so utterly preposterous, yet they were delivered with such conviction that they momentarily pierced his armor of arrogance. There was something in those eyes he couldn't decipher, a quiet power, a depth of resolve that was wholly out of place in a It was intriguing. The clatter of heavy footsteps announced the arrival of security. Two mountains of muscle in black uniforms, their expressions bored and impassive, approached from the back of the store. They looked like they had been ordered from a catalogue for private armies. Come on, kid, let's go, the larger of the two guards said, his voice a flat monotone as he reached a beefy hand toward Jamal's arm. Wait, Theodore Blackstone raised a hand, stopping the guard in his tracks. A cruel smile played on his lips, the smile of a cat who has decided to toy with a mouse before delivering the final bite. He was bored. The $50 million deal had been too easy. This diversion might provide a moment's entertainment. Let him stay a little longer, Blackstone purred, stepping closer to Jamal, his expensive cologne enveloping the boy in a suffocating cloud. I want to have some fun. He circled Jamal slowly, his Italian shoes gleaming under the harsh lights. You said your father died serving his country. How very noble. And your mother works 3 jobs. Let me guess. Cleaner, babysitter, and what else? A hot dog vendor on a street corner. The other customers in the store, sensing a spectacle, began to form a loose circle. Phones emerged from pockets and purses, their small red recording lights winking on like malevolent eyes. The manager, Brenda, crossed her arms over her chest, a smug look of satisfaction on her face. She was clearly enjoying the show. Jamal kept his head held high, his dignity an invisible shield. My mother is a nursing technician on the night shift at Metropolitan Hospital. She works retail at a clothing store during the day, and she cares for the elderly on the weekends. She barely sleeps for hours a night to support us. What an inspiring tale of proletarian struggle, Blackstone mocked, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and produced a thick, alligator skin wallet. With a flourish he extracted a crisp, new $100 bill and held it between his thumb and forefinger. I'll make you a deal, kid, he said, his voice dropping so everyone had to lean in to hear. You get down on your knees, right here, right now, in front of everyone, and you apologize for bothering me, for wasting my valuable time with your pathetic story. If you do that, maybe I'll consider giving this to your hot family. The silence that fell upon the store was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket. Even the humming of the refrigerators seemed to cease. The security guards shifted uncomfortably. This was a level of casual cruelty that went beyond their usual duties of apprehending shock. It was personal, vicious, and utterly unnecessary. Jamal's eyes darted from the $100 bill, a sum so vast it could feed his family for a month. Pay the overdue electricity bill, buy Diamond a new crib. To the expectant, hungry faces of the crowd around him, he could hear his sister's cries in his mind, thin and reedy, the sound of pure, helpless need. He could see his mother's face, etched with exhaustion, when she had collapsed on the sofa just that morning, her body finally giving out $100. It was a lifeline. For a moment, an eternity stretched thin as a wire. Jamal hesitated. He felt the pull of it, the seductive logic of submission, a moment of shame for a month of security. A fair trade, perhaps. Blackstone saw the flicker of conflict in the boy's eyes and smiled a triumphant, predatory grin. He thought he had one, that he had proven his point. See, he said, his voice a triumphant whisper meant for the boy alone. In the end, everyone has their price. It's just a matter of finding the right number. And then, Jamal did something no one, least of all Theodore Blackstone, could have anticipated. He didn't kneel, he didn't cry, he didn't even look at the money anymore. Instead, he took a deliberate step back, breaking the spell. He straightened his shoulders, and when he spoke, his voice was as solid and unyielding as the concrete of the city itself. My father didn't die for his country, so his son could kneel before little men. The air crackled. The crowd let out a collective, soft gasp. Blackstone's face, which had been a mask of smug amusement, darkened into a thundercloud of pure fury. His eyes narrowed, the blue turning to chips of ice. "What did you call me?" he hissed, the words barely audible. "You heard me," Jamal replied, his courage a defiant flame. He carefully placed his 2 dimes back into his pocket, the gesture a final symbolic rejection of the billionaire's offer. "My father was Sergeant David Washington, 2nd Infantry Division. He was a hero. He taught me that you measure a man by the size of his character, not the size of his bank account. And from where I'm standing, sir, you are the poorest man I have ever met in my life." A murmur rippled through the onlookers. A few people, visibly impressed by the boy's audacity, lowered their phones, a flicker of shame in their eyes. Theodore Blackstone felt something he hadn't felt in decades, the sting of being publicly challenged, of his authority being questioned and found wanting. And by a 10-year-old child from the gutter, it was intolerable. He leaned in, his face inches from Jamal's, his voice a low, venomous threat. "You have no idea who you're talking to, boy. I can destroy your family's life with a single phone call. You said your mother works at Metropolitan Hospital. One word from me to the board of directors on which I happen to sit, and she loses that job tonight. How will you buy milk then?" A genuine chill, cold and sharp, traced its way down Jamal's spine. This was a different kind of threat. It was real. It was immediate. But he had learned a vital lesson on the streets of the Bronx. Predators smell fear. You never, ever let them see you sweat. He held Blackstone's gaze, his own expression a mask of calm. He did not feel. "You can try," he said, his voice steady. "But then you'd have to explain to the board, and maybe to the press, why you're so invested in the life of a 10-year-old boy who just wanted to buy some milk for his baby sister." Blackstone let out a short, sharp laugh, but it was brittle, laced with a new thread of nervousness. "No one is going to believe a bum like you over me. I own half this city." "Maybe not," Jamal agreed, his eyes flicking pointedly towards the half-dozen smartphones still aimed in their direction. "But we live in interesting times, don't we? Everyone has a camera in their pocket, and the internet. Well, the internet has a very, very long memory." For the first time since their exchange began, a flicker of genuine concern crossed Theodore Blackstone's face. He shot a quick, anxious glance at the phones, the gears in his formidable brain calculating the potential fallout. A viral video, a billionaire publicly humiliating a Gold Star family's son. The headlines wrote themselves. The damage to his carefully constructed public image as a philanthropist and city benefactor could be catastrophic. Years of work, millions in donations to art museums and charities, all undone by a 2-minute clip. "You people, stop filming immediately," he bellowed at the crowd, his voice cracking with a sudden lack of control. But it was too late. The story was already captured, saved to a dozen different clouds, ready to be unleashed upon the world. Jamal watched the powerful man's composure crumble, a flicker of scientific curiosity piercing through his own fear and anger. It was fascinating, seeing how quickly these titans turned into cowards the moment their actions faced the prospect of real, public consequences. "You know, Mr. Blackstone," Jamal said, pronouncing the name with perfect clarity and precision. The use of his name made Blackstone jolt. The boy hadn't just stumbled upon him. He had known exactly who he was from the very beginning. "I am going to pay you back when I grow up, but maybe not in the way you think." As the boy turned and walked out of the store, empty-handed but with his dignity intact, no one in that elegant Fifth Avenue emporium could have possibly understood the true significance of what they had just witnessed. They had not seen a simple confrontation, a fleeting moment of urban drama. They had witnessed the planting of a seed of righteous fury, watered by humiliation and fertilized by injustice. A seed that would lie dormant for 15 years, drawing strength from the darkness, before erupting into a force of nature that would not just challenge an empire, but bring it crashing down to the very ground it was built upon. Outside, the city air was thick with exhaust fumes and the scent of roasted nuts from a street vendor's cart. Jamal walked, not ran, away from the store. His heart was still a wild drum against his ribs, but his mind was eerily calm, processing the events with a chilling clarity. He had lost the battle for the milk, but he felt as though he had won some other, more important war. Kid, hey, kid, wait up. A woman was hurrying after him. She was in her early 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing, and a nonsense haircut. She wasn't dressed in the opulent style of the other customers. She wore practical jeans and a blazer, and she carried a worn leather satchel. "What's your name?" she asked, her voice kind but direct. "Jamal Washington," he replied, instinctively wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, though no tears had fallen. On the street, weakness was a liability. The woman's name was Margaret Patterson. She was an investigative journalist for the New York Times, a Pulitzer Prize winner with 3 decades of experience dismantling corporate greed and political corruption. She had been in the store to buy a ridiculously expensive coffee, a small indulgence after a grueling week spent chasing a lead on a real estate scandal, and she had filmed the entire interaction on her phone. What she had witnessed wasn't just a billionaire being a bully. It was a perfect, crystalline example of the systemic cruelty and abuse of power she had dedicated her life to exposing. She opened her wallet and pulled out 2 crisp $20 bills and a $10, $50, she said, pressing the money into his hand. "This is for milk, diapers, and whatever else you and your mum need for the week. But it comes with a condition. I want you to promise me something." Jamal looked at the money, then up at her face, wary. "Promise me you will never, ever forget that man's name," Margaret said, her eyes intense. "And you will never, for 1 second, let him or anyone else convince you that you are worth less than he is. Do you understand?" Jamal nodded, clutching the money tightly. "I understand. Thank you, ma'am." As he turned and finally ran, the $50 a miraculous weight in his pocket, Margaret Patterson pulled out her phone again. She didn't call the police. She called her editor. "David, it's me," she said, her voice electric with a reporter's zeal. "Cancel my afternoon. I need you to pull everything we have on Theodore Blackstone. Financials, past lawsuits, political connections, the works. I think our favorite real estate mogul just handed me the opening scene for the story that's going to end his career." Across town, in the back of his chauffeured Maybach, Theodore Blackstone had already dismissed the incident. It was a minor annoyance, a speck of dirt that had been flicked away. He was on his way to a dinner with Japanese investors, his mind already calculating currency, exchange rates, and zoning variances. The humiliation of a poor child from the Bronx was nothing more than a fleeting distraction, a little power play to amuse himself before dessert. He had no way of knowing that Margaret Patterson was a bloodhound, and she had just caught his scent. He had no way of knowing that the memory of his cruelty was now seared into the mind of a boy with a genius-level IQ and a will of iron. When Jamal got home to the small 1-bedroom apartment in the Bronx, the smell of stale air and his mother's worry greeted him at the door. Kesha Washington was awake, her face pale and drawn. Diamond was asleep in her crib, her tiny chest rising and falling peacefully. "Jamal, where have you been?" "I was so worried," Kesha cried, wrapping her arms around him. He showed her the groceries: 2 large cans of powdered milk, diapers, bread, eggs, and even a small chocolate bar he'd bought for her with the change. He explained what had happened, leaving out the most humiliating details of Blackstone's offer, but recounting the confrontation with a calm precision that unnerved his mother. That night, long after his mother and sister were asleep, Jamal sat at the small kitchen table. He pulled out a worn spiral notebook and a pencil. For weeks, he had been using it for his math homework, filling pages with complex equations his teachers said were years beyond his grade level. But tonight, he turned to a fresh page. At the top, in careful, deliberate letters, he wrote, "Project Justice." Underneath, he wrote the first entry, "Theodore Blackstone, vulnerabilities, ego, reputation, money." He didn't know yet how he would do it. He was only 10 years old. He had no money, no power, no connections. All he had were the 2 dimes in his pocket, a searing memory of injustice, and a promise he had made to himself and to a billionaire in a Fifth Avenue convenience store. He would pay him back. For the first time, he understood what his father, Sergeant David Washington, had tried to teach him in his letters from Afghanistan. True strength wasn't about how hard you could hit. It was about how much you could take and still move forward. It was about patience. It was about strategy. But in the silent, sleeping apartment in the Bronx, a war had been declared. It would be a war fought not with weapons, but with intellect, not with armies, but with information. It would be a 15-year siege, meticulously planned and ruthlessly executed. Theodore Blackstone had won the first battle over 20 cents worth of milk. He had no idea he was about to lose everything else. 15 years is an eternity in The life of a boy in a blink of an eye in the life of an empire. For Jamal Washington, those years were a crucible. They were the blur of fluorescent lights in the public library, the scent of old paper and dust, the relentless pursuit of knowledge. They were the scholarship to Exeter, where he learned the language and customs of the elite, the very people he planned to hold accountable. They were the full ride to Harvard, where he devoured contract law and corporate finance, and then to Harvard Law, where he graduated summa cum laude, his mind a finely honed weapon. He wasn't just studying the law, he was studying its loopholes, its pressure points, the secret passages through which men like Blackstone moved with impunity. He was mentored by Margaret Patterson, who had become a surrogate aunt, feeding him not just books and encouragement, but insider knowledge from her own decades-long crusade against the corrupt. Every paper he wrote, every mock trial he won, every summer internship he took with the SEC or the U.S. Attorney's Office was a stone being sharpened, a gear being machined for the great, complex engine of justice he was building in his mind. For Theodore Blackstone, those 15 years were a victory lap. His fortune swelled, his skyscrapers grew taller, his power became more entrenched. He moved through a world of private jets, lavish galas, and fawning politicians. The incident in the convenience store became a favorite anecdote, a story he would tell at expensive dinners to elicit sycophantic laughter from his billionaire friends. You should have seen the look on his face when I offered him $100 to kneel. He'd chuckle, swirling a 30-year-old scotch in his glass. These kids from the projects, they need to be taught their place in the world early on. It's a form of public service, really. He never knew that some of those friends were Margaret Patterson's sources. Every arrogant boast, every dismissive laugh, was recorded, transcribed, and filed away in the ever-growing dossier she shared with Jamal, the Project Justice notebook from his childhood had evolved into a labyrinthine network of encrypted files, a digital ghost that shadowed Blackstone's every move, documenting every shady deal, every political bribe, every family he pushed out of a rent-controlled apartment to make way for a luxury high-rise. Jamal single quotes S. life was Spartan, focused. While his classmates chased lucrative jobs at corporate law firms, he chose the modest salary of a federal prosecutor. He started in the narcotics division, cutting his teeth on complex cases, learning how to build an indictment brick by brick, how to turn witnesses, how to follow the money. He earned a reputation for being meticulous, relentless, and brilliant. After 3 years, he was transferred to the division he had always targeted, financial crimes, Wall Street division, and he waited. He was patient. Just as he had learned from Margaret, was not a lightning strike. It was the slow, inexorable erosion of a mountain. The day finally came. An anonymous tip, carefully orchestrated by Margaret through a shell organization, landed on his desk. It pointed to irregularities in the zoning approvals for Blackstone's newest flagship project, the Olympus Tower. It was the loose thread he had been waiting for. For 2 years, Jamal led a secret grand jury investigation, pulling that thread until the entire corrupt tapestry of Blackstone's empire began to unravel. The morning of the reckoning was crisp and clear, a perfect autumn day in New York. From the 50th floor window of his office in Blackstone Tower on Park Avenue, Theodore Blackstone, now 60 years old with a mane of distinguished silver hair, could see all the way to the Statue of Liberty. He was feeling expansive, invincible. The Olympus Tower was nearly complete, a gleaming spear of glass and steel that would be his crowning achievement. The rumors that had been swirling around Wall Street for weeks, whispers of a federal investigation, were an annoyance. But he wasn't truly worried. He had senators on speed dial and judges in his pocket. He had weathered investigations before. He was too big to fail, too powerful to fall. His intercom buzzed. It was his executive assistant, her voice tight with panic. "Mr. Blackstone, the FBI is here. They have warrants." The blood drained from his face. Before he could process her words, the double doors to his office swung open. 3 stern-faced federal agents in dark suits entered, their expressions grim. And behind them, moving with a calm, predatory grace, was the architect of his doom. He was a young black man, perhaps 25, dressed in an impeccably tailored navy suit. He carried a fine leather briefcase, and on his face was a small, knowing smile that struck a chord of memory so deep and so terrifying that Blackstone felt the floor drop out from beneath him. "Mr. Blackstone," the young man said, his voice smooth and steady as he extended a hand. "Jamal Washington. I'm a federal prosecutor with the U.S. Attorney's Office, specializing in financial crimes. I believe we've met before." Theodore Blackstone stared into the same dark, determined eyes he had looked down upon 15 years ago in a Fifth Avenue convenience store. The world tilted on its axis. The air in his lungs turned to poison. He couldn't breathe, he stammered, stumbling backward. "You're that kid who promised to pay you back when I grew up," Jamal finished for him, his voice devoid of triumph, filled only with a chilling, matter-of-fact certainty. "Well, Mr. Blackstone, consider this your bill. It's time to settle your account." As the agents began methodically confiscating computers, seizing documents, and boxing up files, Jamal opened his briefcase on Blackstone's vast mahogany desk. It wasn't full of legal pads. It was a portable command center. He pulled out an array of meticulously organized evidence binders and a tablet. "For the past 15 years, Jamal began, his tone conversational, as if discussing the weather, "I've studied every move your company has made, every offshore account in the Cayman Islands used to launder money, every bribe paid to city council members for favorable zoning laws, every family illegally evicted from your properties through intimidation and fraudulent paperwork. It's all here." He tapped the screen of his tablet. "But what I find most impressive, truly, is your arrogance. Do you have any idea how many times you've told that story about our first meeting, the one in the convenience store?" Blackstone had turned a ghastly shade of pale. "Recorded 63 times, to be exact," Jamal said, his voice hardening slightly. "At dinners, on golf courses, in boardrooms, all meticulously documented. You were always laughing about how you put a pretentious kid in his place." He pressed a button on the tablet, and Blackstone's own unmistakable voice, amplified by a hidden microphone, filled the opulent office. "These kids from the projects, they need to learn their place in the world early on." Jamal switched it off. "Margaret Patterson sends her regards. Her work in investigative journalism has been invaluable in documenting your philosophical expansions over the years. In fact, she's downstairs right now, covering your arrest live for the New York Times." Blackstone collapsed into his backed leather chair, the weight of a 15-year siege finally crashing down upon him. "This is impossible," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You were a child, a beggar." "A child, yes," Jamal corrected him gently. "A beggar, no. I wasn't begging for money that day, Mr. Blackstone. I was offering you a chance. A chance to prove that decency wasn't dependent on a balance sheet, that compassion had a place in this world." You rejected the offer. He walked to the window, looking down at the swarm of news vans and reporters gathering on the street below. "I was begging for a chance to prove that dignity doesn't have a price tag, that intelligence has no color, and that underestimating someone based on their appearance is the most expensive mistake a man can make." One of the FBI agents approached them. "Mr. Washington, we've found it. The files you mentioned, the Cayman accounts, the forged contracts, the slush fund ledger. It's all here, just like your informant said." Blackstone shot to his feet, a last, desperate surge of his old power flaring up. "My lawyers will destroy you. I have connections, in Washington, in Albany. I will burn your career to the ground." Jamal simply smiled, a sad, pitying smile. He pulled another document from his briefcase. "About your connections, Senator Morrison, your man in Washington, was arrested yesterday by our colleagues in the Public Corruption Unit for accepting bribes. Judge Hartwell, who has conveniently dismissed every case against your company for the last decade, is currently under federal investigation. And Mayor Davidson, your friend who greased the wheels for those evictions, he announced his resignation this morning, citing health reasons. It seems you've run out of friends, Mr. Blackstone." The color drained completely from the older man's face. How did you?" 15 years, Jamal said, the words landing like hammer blows. 15 years of studying law at Harvard on a full scholarship, specializing in the very white-collar crimes you perfected. 15 years of building a network of allies in the justice system, in journalism, in government, people who still believe in things like law and order, while you were toasting your own success at expensive dinners, telling stories about how you humiliated a child. "I was preparing for this very moment." Blackstone's phone began to ring incessantly, a frantic, desperate sound. On the television in the corner of his office, the ticker at the bottom of the screen showed the stock of Blackstone Enterprises in a freefall, down 40, then 50, then 60%. "My family," Blackstone mumbled, his mind finally grasping the totality of his ruin. "My reputation, my business." "Your family," Jamal said, his voice now cold as the marble floor of that convenience store, "will soon discover that the gilded cage they live in was built with money stolen from working families. your reputation will be exposed for what it is, the fraudulent mask of a financial predator, and your businesses, built on a foundation of cruelty and corruption, will be dismantled and liquidated to pay back every person you ever wronged. Closed his briefcase and looked Theodore Blackstone directly in the eye. But I want you to understand something. This isn't personal revenge. My life turned out fine. This is for the families whose homes you stole, for the children who went hungry because you illegally doubled their rent, for every dream you crushed in the name of profit. This is justice. The patient, methodical kind, an agent approached, with a pair of handcuffs. As the cold steel clicked around Blackstone's wrists, he seemed to shrink, the titan of industry reduced to a scared old man. Jamal turned and walked to the door. He pulled out his own phone and made a call. "Mum, it's me. Yeah, I'm okay. Turn on the TV. I just fulfilled that promise I made when I was 10 years old." On the other end of the line, he could hear Kesha Washington's soft, proud tears as the disgraced billionaire was led through the hallways he had once ruled. Past stunned employees who avoided his gaze, he muttered one last thing to Jamal. 20 cents. All of this, for 20 cents worth of milk. Jamal stopped and turned back to him, his expression unreadable. "No, Mr. Blackstone, you're still not getting it." He paused, letting the weight of his final words sink. "And this was for 15 years of dignity. The dignity you tried to steal from a child in a single moment. The difference between us is what we did with our resources. You invested your arrogance in cruelty and corruption. I invested my pain in education, determination, and justice, and permanist. Today, the market has finally made its correction." 3 years later, the building formerly known as Blackstone Tower had been reborn. In elegant gold letters across the facade, it now read, "The Jamal Washington Center for Social Justice." The 50th floor, once Theodore Blackstone's personal throne room, was now a bustling hub of pro bono lawyers, paralegals, and social workers providing free legal aid to low-income families, fighting illegal evictions and predatory landlords. Jamal, now 28, stood at that same window, but he saw a different city. He saw a city where the scales were, ever so slightly, more balanced. His work had not stopped with Blackstone. The investigation had spawned a dozen others, leading to the convictions of 17 other corrupt billionaires and the recovery of over $2 billion in stolen funds, all of which had been funneled into a foundation that now funded affordable housing projects, educational programs in the Bronx, and scholarships for underprivileged students. In a federal penitentiary upstate, Theodore Blackstone, prisoner number 734-06054, spent his days in a two-bathrometer cell, his panoramic view of Manhattan replaced by a concrete wall. His wife had divorced him, his children had changed their names, his fortune was gone. He was a ghost, a cautionary tale whispered on Wall Street. His only relevance was as a symbol of an era of unchecked greed that was finally being brought to account. That evening, Jamal sat for a televised interview, a 3-year retrospective on the case that had made him a national figure. Margaret Patterson sat in the front row, her face beaming with a pride that was almost maternal. The interviewer asked the inevitable question, "That promise you made as a 10-year-old boy, I swear I'll pay you back. Do you feel now, today, that it has finally been fulfilled?" Jamal smiled, a genuine relaxed smile that reached his eyes. "Not just fulfilled," he said, "it's been multiplied. That 20 cents he refused me has been transformed into $2 billion for the community. That one kid he tried to humiliate has become the voice for thousands who had no one to fight for them. Mr. Blackstone taught me a valuable lesson that day. The best way to defeat a bully isn't to stoop to his level. It's to build a future where his brand of cruelty becomes irrelevant." During a commercial break, his phone buzzed. It was a text from his sister, Diamond. She was the baby he had tried to buy milk for, now a brilliant, confident teenager, and the valedictorian of her elite prep school. The text was a picture of her acceptance letter to Harvard Law. "Following in my big brother's footsteps," the message read, "Time to go deliver some justice." When the interview resumed, the host asked him about his future plans. "I'm considering a run for the U.S. Senate," Jamal revealed, his voice steady and sure, "because prosecuting criminals one by one is important, but changing the corrupt systems that create them in the first place, that's how you truly pay a debt back to society." The promise of 20 cents had become a movement. The echo of a child's defiant voice in a convenience store had become the roar of a generation demanding change. Jamal Washington had learned that true power wasn't about building skyscrapers of glass and steel. It was about building foundations of justice upon which others could rise. He hadn't just paid back a billionaire. He had changed the terms of the deal for everyone.